Our subject today is the story of Shiva, and this is in preparation to the Shivaratri Puja we will have on Friday. And this is puja we have every year, so many of you have attended this puja, either here or in some other temples. And many of you are also familiar with Shiva. And so, even though we may be familiar with the ideal that Shiva represents, it's helpful, at least periodically, to remind ourselves of what we already know, or what we think we know. One of the ways, irrespective of whichever tradition we come from, one of the ways we think of the divine, God, as a being, as someone who embodies everything that is perfect, everything that is good, everything that is auspicious. If we can think of anything that is pure, holy, sacred, then we know it's in some way a part of the divine. In fact, in many ancient texts, they use this adjective in Sanskrit. They say, Sakala Kalyana Guna Nilaya. Sakala means all, Kalyana means auspicious, Guna is the attributes or qualities, Nilaya means an abode. So God is seen as this one place or one person, one being who is the embodiment of everything that is sacred, everything that is auspicious, everything that is holy. Now, when we are therefore asked to think about God or meditate on God or pray to God, it sometimes just appears too limitless because we are thinking about an infinite being who embodies everything that is wonderful. And we can have a kind of a vague idea of what that would mean, but the moment our mind tries to think or imagine who this being is, we find that our mind is just too limited. And so that has always been the challenge. How can we grasp this infinite reality, the infinite truth, the infinite being that God represents with this very limited, very fragile mind that we have? So, one of the things that happened, God knows when, way beyond where history can take us, that some of these early seekers of God, they tried to think, they tried to immerse themselves in just taking some of the qualities. Well, infinite qualities are there present in the divine. Why not just focus on some of these, some specific quality? And when they immerse themselves in some specific aspects of the divine, what they discovered was something very fascinating. So the different deities that get worshipped, we have special worships here at the Vedanta Center almost throughout the year, and we have these different deities being worshipped. So who are these different deities? How are they related to one another? What is their relationship to each one of us? And one of the ways of understanding this phenomenon of these deities that are present, certainly in Hinduism, but in many other traditions as well, is to think about it's the efforts of the human mind to try to somehow grasp, which is the one who is essentially ungraspable. The effort of the human mind to understand someone who is beyond our limited human understanding. And so when the mind tried to grapple with this and kind of focus on certain ideals, amazing discoveries came. And these different deities represent these some specific aspects of the divine. The divine God is unlimited, eternal. But when we try to grasp, we can at least grasp some aspect of the divine. And so each of these things that emerged out of this deep contemplation of these ancient sages took the form of these deities. Now, the deities are symbols, symbols of the infinite reality of God. But these are not ordinary symbols, because we know symbols, one can say, well, I don't like this symbol, I'm going to substitute it with some other symbol. But these symbols are not substitutable in that sense, because these are really powerful symbols. And what gives each of these religious symbols the power is the deep reality at the heart of each of these symbols. And it is this special power that is present in each of these symbols which gives them the power to bless, the power to bestow grace, the power to transform lives. And so each of these deities represents a reality, but reality seen through a specific lens. And that's what makes one deity different from another. That doesn't make one God different from another God. God is one. God is one and infinite being. But our human effort to try to grasp, understand, connect with this infinite takes these different forms. And these forms, as I said, are special, not like any other material forms that we see, because these forms are powerful enough to bestow grace, and they have the power to change our life. So Shiva is one such great and powerful deity. And as many deities in the tradition, each of even the names, they're not just random names. Each of the names also tells us something about the deity as well. So the word Shiva in Sanskrit, the literal meaning of the term means anything that is auspicious, that is good, that is sacred. Another name for Shiva is often Shankara. Again, Sham in Sanskrit means that which is good, that which is holy, that which is auspicious. Kara means one who does, one who brings about something good and auspicious in our lives. Now, each of these deities, that's the thing with the human mind. Once we immerse ourselves and these symbols begin to emerge, they start acquiring a character of their own. They acquire, well, once you have a form, then what kind of a form, and so on. And that's how these deities, each deity has a history, a narrative, a story, which was not, again, none of these things were thought about intellectually. There was no committee who sat and said, okay, let's fashion this deity this way. So these things have emerged through the deep contemplations of these great yogis and sages. And so when we think about Shiva, this great symbol that emerged, God knows when, is one of they found in some of the oldest among the representations in the I'm not that great in history, but in the archaeological finds, they found the symbols of Shiva way back when. So it's not something that was thought about only a little while ago. So let's take a look in our minds about how does Shiva look? What does Shiva stand for? In some sense, Shiva stands apart from many other deities in the tradition, because most other deities we find in the tradition have a kind of, how would you describe it? come with some fine clothings and shining and ornaments and gold and everything that we might associate with prosperity and something beauty and so on. Shiva somehow stands a little bit different from that, because we don't see him wearing all these very shining clothes. All that Shiva wears is, oftentimes you see some of these representations of Shiva in image or pictures. We see him either wearing just a tiger skin or just nothing very very attractive in our normal sense of the term. And many of these deities also have some companions around them. And each of these deities also had what in Sanskrit they call a vahana, a vehicle, the one who always accompanies or goes along with the deity. Now in Vishnu, for instance, has this golden eagle. It's a very powerful vehicle that Vishnu has. Goddess Durga, many of you see, has this, who rides on a lion. Now Shiva's vehicle is a bull, an old bull. Not just a bull, it's an old bull. Now we know that clearly bulls can be very useful. In many agricultural countries, they're used for plowing. They're used, of course, you need them for breeding. But an old bull who can neither be used for agriculture nor for breeding, and it's a pretty useless creature from a purely utilitarian standpoint. And then this old bull becomes Shiva's vehicle. And the ornaments that we find that Shiva is wearing is not made of gold and diamond and silver, none of those things. He really has, as a necklace, he has a very poisonous snake. And then there are all these scorpions and all these other creatures. None of these creatures we would like to keep as pets. Some people do keep snakes, I think, but very rarely. And then, of course, the companions of Shiva, as deities also have these other people around them. You find that all the people who are kind of the rejected lot in the world, people whom nobody wants to be friends with, and they find Shiva are surrounding Shiva. So, and that's why I said Shiva is a very unusual deity. And one of the ways to understand better what Shiva stands for is to look at one of the very well-known stories in Indian mythology. It's called the stirring, the churning of the milk ocean. So there is this mythic ocean, the milk ocean filling the entire universe. And there was this idea, there was this belief in those days that at the bottom of the ocean, there were great treasures. And because the ocean is so deep, and none of them had ever actually gone and seen it, but they had heard of lots of treasures at the beginning. And so something had to be done to bring those treasures up, because who doesn't want treasures? And so there are these two forces often mentioned in ancient mythology, the forces of good and the forces of destruction, the good people and the wicked people. And so the good forces are often described in these books as Sura in Sanskrit, or Deva. And the forces of the wickedness, they are often described as Asuras or Rakshasas. And they coexist. Neither of them is able to destroy the other. So it's almost like the political divisions we find in the country today. So they exist, and which is really the reality of the world in which we live. The forces of good, the forces of evil. Neither is good completely able to eliminate evil, as some of us do believe that one day it will happen. So far it hasn't. And neither has evil completely obliterated good. So these two exist. Now, these forces of good and evil, these suras and asuras, neither of them by themselves had the power to get these treasures out. Each hated the other. But where they were united is in wanting these treasures. And so sometimes, in order to meet a common goal, sometimes people who may not be very friendly with each other might also collaborate and say, okay, let's collaborate together because this is something that both of us want. And so this kind of an unlikely alliance took place between these suras and asuras to churn this milk ocean and get these treasures out. Now, when you have to churn something, you need a big rod, and then there is this rope to churn. Now, this is an infinite ocean of milk. So the only big rod that they could find was this highest mountain, which is described in this mythology as Mount Meru. So they got this Mount Meru as this churning rod. And the rope to churn, they got this big ocean, the big snake. This is the Vasuki snake, which is one of the most virulent poisonous snakes. And they wound that snake around that mountain, and then they said, okay, you pull from the other side and we'll pull from the other. And these devas, who always think of themselves as the smarter among the lot, they don't always succeed, but they think they are smart. So they tell these asuras, we'll be at the tail, we'll hold the tail, you hold the face, because that's where the poison comes from. And asuras are like, okay, they are not afraid. They knew they can deal with that. And so these asuras are pulling from this face of the snake, the devas from the tail, and they start churning. And then this whole milk ocean starts getting churned. And once the churning starts, all those things at the bottom of the ocean, they start coming up one by one. Now, they probably didn't make their agreement perfect. So they hadn't yet decided what to do when all these things come up. They knew there were a lot of treasures, but among these treasures, they knew there was one thing that was like the most, something that everyone wanted, and probably every one of us would want too. That was called this Amrita Kumbha. So it's one jar which contained this elixir of life. Something if you take, you will be immortal. And so while everyone wanted all these treasures, what they really wanted was that elixir of life. But they hadn't planned in advance, is like what to do when these treasures come. How are we going to divide it? Somehow that was not much decided. So as these treasures started coming up, everyone was like pouncing on whatever they could lay their hands on. And some amazing things came up from that ocean. Among the things that came up, remember we do this Kalpataru observance Now this mythic tree in heaven, standing under that tree, whatever you wish for you will get. That was one of the treasures under this ocean. So that came up. And of course, Indra, these devas picked it up and then planted it in heaven. Kamadhenu, there's another one, cow, which again would fulfill all your desires. That cow came up, and different treasures came, and everyone was pouncing on them and getting what they can. What they didn't know was, as I said, they were all waiting for that elixir of life. What was the surprise thing? And there's always surprises in life. Suddenly, in the midst of all these treasures, they found some dark, vicious stuff coming up from underneath. And looking at them, they realized it was the worst kind of poison. It's called Kalakuta poison. The poison that had the power to destroy the entire creation. And they said, we didn't even know it was there. Now, when it started coming up, neither of them, they knew that this would mean a destruction. It would be an equivalent of a nuclear destruction, something that all of us could, we think it won't happen, but it could. So that was the Kalakuta equivalent of those days. And so they were terrified. Now, among all these, everyone had gathered there. The only person who hadn't come there at all was Shiva. He was just sitting there on his Mount Kailash, just meditating. Totally unconcerned, totally indifferent with all these, where the entire creation has gone, he's just sitting there. And they knew instinctively that the only person who can truly save this creation from that poison is the Shiva. None of us has the power to stop that. And so, of course, they all go to him and say, do something, please save us. And Shiva opens his eyes, he sees this poison, he just dips his palm into that ocean, picks up that whole poisonous stuff and just drinks it. Because it has to go somewhere. If it is left in the world, it's going to destroy the world. He just drinks it. And he was such a, quote, the best among the yogis. And so I'll challenge you, drink a little bit of water, let it come up to here and say, I won't allow it to go down. We are not going to succeed. If anything you liquid you take, if it comes here, it is going to go down. But Shiva was such a yogi. So that poison was so great, it could have hurt Shiva as well, perhaps. And so when that poison came, when it reached here, Shiva said, stop. And it stopped. It didn't go further. But that poison was so strong that even for Shiva, it left a mark. It made his entire throat blue in color. And so one of the epithets of Shiva, one of the ways Shiva gets called is Nilakantha. Nila means blue and Kantha is the throat, the blue-throated one. And it's an interesting story about what happened afterwards, and maybe on some other day we can discuss it. But let's stop here and see that, of course, afterwards then these fellows again go back, the poison is gone, they start churning and they get busy with their thing. And Shiva again goes back and is in deep meditation again. But before we see what happened to Shiva and why he did whatever he did, it's also important to remember that this churning of the ocean has also an inner meaning for our lives. Often our mind is thought of as especially in books on yoga, is thought of as a lake. It's a deep lake. You could even think of it as an ocean. And we know that there are lots of things in the unconscious part of our own mind. And sometimes people might consciously go and churn their own mind, and God knows what things will come up. But sometimes, even though we may not do it consciously, some cataclysmic event in our life or in our family or wherever, or even in the world outside, some things can trigger the churning of the ocean in our own minds, in our own hearts. And great things will come up. There are so many wonderful memories that we have. And it's amazing that some of the great and truly pleasant and sweet things that have happened in our life can sometimes get buried in the memory. We may not even remember it. But sometimes suddenly it just comes up and says, oh, that was so wonderful. This happened 30 years ago. And it just makes us feel good when we think about some really sweet memories from our own life. And those are the treasures in the ocean in our own heart. But alongside these wonderful, sweet memories that we have, there could also be some painful memories, something that we don't want to think about, which we hope that if we don't think about it, it'll just disappear. But sometimes even that can come up. And that's like poison. It can make us anxious, it can stress us out, it can make, really, it can be a very painful experience. What are we going to do with that poison, with that painful stuff coming up from our own hearts? Can we be like Shiva? Can we somehow acquire the ability, the power, the capacity to drink that poison and not get consumed by it? So let's go back to Shiva now and then see, what do we learn about the characteristics that Shiva represents? When we think of the divine in this way, what are the images, what are the ideas that emerge from it? And one of the first things that we see is a total indifference to what others might think as something very valuable and great. And we see that when everyone was out there churning the ocean, thinking that they are going to benefit from some of the treasures that will come, and Shiva said, no, not worth it. So we might have to think about what are the things that attract us in life and what are the things that we are indifferent to. What we see in Shiva is that this viveka, the discernment, a lot of times something in a very superficial way might look very pleasant, might look very attractive, might look worth pursuing. But in a deeper, when we look at something deeply, we might discover then, oh no, it's not what I thought it was. And then that kind of a discernment helps us decide what I should pursue in life and what I should not. And so this is the first quality we see in Shiva, this deep discernment, looking deeply at everything and then deciding what is worth my attention, where should I give my time and energy, and what doesn't deserve that. And so apparently it would look like an indifference, but deep down it just seems seeds of wisdom lie there. And similarly, we'll have many choices to make in our lives. And sometimes in a superficial way, some of the choices might seem to be good. But if we look deeply, it's not as if everything that appears good is bad. That's not what I'm saying. But if we look deeply, at least some of the things that appear good may not be so good. And vice versa. Some of the things that appear bad may not be so bad. So this ability to look deeply will give us a chance to make better decisions in life, to make better choices in life. The second thing we see in Shiva is a willingness to accept whatever is rejected by all. We saw that in the way the iconographic image of Shiva. Nobody wants all these poisonous snakes and scorpions, and Shiva says, come to me. Nobody wants some crazy people, and Shiva says, come to me. Nobody wants an old bull, and Shiva says, come to me. I remember I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and this was that was the time I first read about this, that Shiva, one of the epithets of Shiva is Ashutosha. Ashu means quickly. Tosha means becoming happy. That Shiva becomes happy very quickly. It's very easy to please Shiva. In fact, there are some fascinating stories. One of the stories is, here is this one hunter whose family is very hungry. They haven't had eaten anything for long. And so he said, I'm just now going to go into the forest, hunt, maybe catch, kill a deer or something, and then come home, cook it, and feed my family. So he goes into the forest, and then it's a very, very dark. And so he climbs up a tree and says, let me just wait here. And there's a small little pond there. And so these deer or some animals will come to take water, and I can then hunt them. And so he waits. And in order to get a better view, so there are all these leaves and branches in front. So he just to get a better view, he kind of plucks off some of the leaves in front and then waits. And a whole night passes by. No animal comes there, no deers come there. And he is heartbroken. He says, my children are hungry, and what am I going to do? And he's just shedding tears that I'm not able to feed my family. And to his utter surprise, Shiva appears before him and says, I am pleased with your worship, and ask whatever you want. And he didn't even know he was worshipping. So it turned out that was the Shivaratri night. It also turned out that the tree he had climbed up was this Bilva tree. And in the Shiva worship, the leaves of that Bilva leaves are considered as sacred for Shiva worship. And so it also turned out that there was a small little Shivalinga at the foot of the tree. He hadn't seen any of that in the dark. And so these leaves that he plucked fell on that Shivalinga. The tears that were coming from his eyes was like bathing the Shivalinga. And Shiva is just pleased. He said, I'm happy with your worship. Now, this story is sometimes described in books to say how easy it is to please him. So I was saying that when I was very young, and I was reading about all these stories in very easily found in history books and other books in India when I was growing up. And one of the things it said was, some of these other forms of the divine, they might have some conditions you have to fulfill in order to be accepted. But Shiva, even if nobody accepts you, there is one place you can go to without any fear of rejection. Now, I wasn't really a bad kid. It wasn't like I was like, oh my God, who will accept me? But somehow, just reading this, we just felt like, oh, this is wonderful. There's one place, even if something terrible happens in my life, this is one being I can go to. So that is one thing. And that aspect of Shiva, to accept whoever and whatever is rejected by others, it just shows his great compassion. That empathy and compassion. In the Vedanta text, they often speak about seeing yourself in others and others' self in you. That's the idea of oneness. And so in Buddha's teaching we find, he speaks about prajna and karuna. That knowledge, prajna, and karuna is compassion. So this ideal of compassion, of seeing oneself in others, that we are not really helping others. In helping anyone, we are really helping our own selves. Because the same one true divine being that pervades everything and everyone in this creation. And a third thing we saw in Shiva's life was this willingness to sacrifice. Just even take that virulent poison so that the world be saved. So some of these, when we oftentimes sing here the hymn that Shankaracharya wrote, it's called Nirvana Shatkam. And one of the refrains, the line that comes often at the end of every verse in that song is Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. Shivoham is Aham Shiva, I am Shiva, I am Shiva. So what does it mean? Are we Shiva or not? And we say, well, Shiva was this great symbol that we were thinking about. And the idea is, if these qualities whose embodiment personifies as Shiva, if I can manifest in my own way, in however little a measure, in my own life, if I can somehow embrace these qualities and try to live according to the demands of these qualities, then to that extent, I can then truly say Shivoham, Shivoham, that I am Shiva. If I can live with discernment, with that Viveka, the way Shiva did, so I can make better choices in life. If I can live with compassion, with understanding, and if I'm willing to sacrifice, what does sacrifice really mean? That in any situation, if the first thing I think about is what am I going to get out of it? If my self-interest is at the top of the list, then that spirit of sacrifice hasn't entered into me. But if my first I think of what can I do for you? How can I help you? And if I think of myself last, then that would be sacrifice. Now here is a trick. Those who think of themselves first, those who put their self-interest first, actually stand to lose a lot. That's what history has shown. And those who put the needs of others first, even before themselves, they gain a lot. So even from a purely utilitarian standpoint, it pays to be unselfish. Swami Vivekananda actually said something very similar. He said that unselfishness is more paying, only people don't have the patience to practice it. Because if we think, if I become very unselfish, if I start sacrificing, then what will remain with me? Everything will go away. But actually it's just the opposite. But don't think of that now. So it's like when you want to help someone, oh, later on I'm going to get it. Then again, you're putting a self-interest behind it. So when you are sacrificing, don't think about the self at all. But that is what history has shown. So truly, we can say, touching our heart, every one of us can say, I am Shiva, if we are truly and sincerely make an effort to live, to look deeply at everything, to not do anything mechanically, to live with full awareness, to live with compassion, and to be willing to think of others before thinking of ourselves. That's the ideal that Shiva represents. And so when we get ready for Shiva worship, try to keep this ideal before you, that the best way to offer our worship to Shiva, yes, of course, we'll have a ritualistic worship here. There will be the ceremonial bathing of the Shivalinga. There will be flower offering. All those things are great. But all of those things will become even more meaningful if I can truly make a resolve that I will make my best effort to cultivate these qualities in my own life. We may not succeed fully, but it's better to try and fail than never to have tried at all. And we won't fail. If we can truly and sincerely try this, and that's really what grace means. No effort is ever going to be enough. And that we can remind ourselves every day if you want. We can do as much prayer as you want, as much meditation, as much studies, as much argumentation, whatever you do, whatever effort we make in our spiritual life is never going to be enough. But if I give it my best shot, if I'm truly sincere to the backbone, as they say, then even if my effort is not enough, something will happen to make that effort complete. And that something is what is called grace. So that would be the best form of worship that we can offer on Friday. To make this firm resolve that in my own little way, I can truly say Shivoham, I am Shiva. But it's not just the words. It will become a reality if I make an effort to live that way.